we are moving on, and this is going to be the last part of the program, which is the workshop. After then, we have discussion, we have question and answer. The workshop is on big data application for smart farming practices, and that is going to be delivered by no other person other than Mr. Adeiza Suleman. Mr. Adeiza Suleman, I've read his profile earlier, but I would attempt to make a summary of who Mr. Adeiza is. He's a self-driven professional with strong background in data analytics and management consulting. He is interested in diverse sectors such as oil and gas, power, financial services, and edtech. And as we speak, Mr. Adeiza currently supports 4 companies within the Sahara Power Group by designing key performance measures, tracking and monitoring performance, and recommending data-driven solutions to ensure that the companies are efficient and smart. So without wasting much of our time, ladies and gentlemen, let me bring onto the stage Mr. Adeiza Suleman. Mr. Suleman, it's my pleasure to welcome you on the stage.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Adebi. I hope you can all hear me loud and clear. I just want to be sure that I'm loud and clear.
Yes, you are loud and clear.
Thank you very much, sir. So I want to thank Farm Connect for organizing this session, bringing us together to deliver the session on how big data can improve and grow the agricultural sector within Nigeria and Africa as a whole. Okay, special thanks goes to Mr. Oluwole for organizing this, and it's a special privilege to be among Professor Ndubisi Ekwekwe on this session. I also like to thank Ismail as well for coordinating the program. Okay, so I'll try to, I have I think about 40 minutes to complete my session. I'll try to do it in 30 minutes. So some of the things that Professor has mentioned, I'll try to cut that out as we go along. Okay, so I'll be sharing my slides with you, and we'll have a session within the next 30 minutes. So I'll be doing that within, so if you can allow me share my slides, Ismail. So if you can make me co-host or simply allow me share. Okay. All right, thank you very much for that. So I'll be sharing my slides. All right, so we want to look at big data application for smart farming practices. And of course, Prof has given us a lot of things to think about and to ponder upon. So I'll just try to build upon that. And of course, we can take questions at the end of the program. Okay, my name is Adeiza Suleman. Just a quick introduction. I'm a data analyst, the founder of Tenalytics, which is a data analytics training organization and data analytics. We provide data analytics solution. Our focus in Tenalytics is to ensure that we provide accessible data analytics training and solutions to our clients. I have over 6 years experience cutting across data analytics and management consulting, graduated with a first class in industrial chemistry. I'm very passionate about teaching, and I'm a strong believer of data is changing our lives for the better. And of course, this is how the session would go. I'll take you through how big data analytics is changing the way we live, how leading organizations are leveraging on big data analytics to drive business growth and to drive profitability. And then we'll look at the agri sector and how the agri sector can also leverage on the same big data analytics to drive growth. Okay, so this is the way the session would go in that format. But before we start, I want us to quickly do a little exercise, 2-3 minute exercise. So if you can see my slide, you would see that you have random numbers at the left-hand side. So what I want us to do quickly is this. I want you to find numbers sequentially. So number 1, number 2, 3, 4, and like that. Look for those numbers sequentially, and within 10 seconds, I want to know how many of the numbers you can find. Okay, so look for numbers sequentially on the slide. So look for number 1, look for number 2, number 3. It has to be in that sequence. And let me know how many numbers you can find. Okay, so I'll set my timer, and my timer will start now. Okay, so it's time up, just 10 seconds, a 10 seconds exercise. And I quickly want to know, how many numbers were you able to find? How many people could find 10 numbers from 1 to 10? You can just send that to the group chats. Okay. Mikhail found 11. Okay, anybody else? 11 seems to be the highest so far. Did anybody get more than 11? 10, 14, Wenga got 14. Fantastic. 24, wow. 9, okay. So 24 seems to be the highest. 24 seems to be the highest. Okay. Mr. Oluwole is telling us that there's a pattern. All right, so now let's look at the next slide and see. What if you draw a line vertically and horizontally across to create 4 quadrants like we have on the slide now? So you've been able to segment the same sheet that has the numbers into 4 different parts. And there is a pattern like Mr. Oluwole suggested. Now, number 1 is at the top left quadrant. Then you have number 2 at the top right. Number 3 is at the bottom right. And number 4 is at the bottom left. And that is the sequence. And that is the pattern in which the numbers go. You have number 1, 2, 3, and 4, like that, in that sequence. Okay. So now that we know that there's a sequence and there's a pattern to these numbers, let's do the exercise again. So let's try the exercise and let's see how many numbers you can find this time around. So we have 10 seconds to do that as well. So let's do that and see. How many numbers can you identify this time around? So the time has started. And time up. Okay, so that's the end of the second exercise. Now, how many numbers were you able to identify this time around? How many numbers? Quickly send that to the group. 10, 17. Okay. Who else tried it this time around? I didn't try it before, or tried it before and tried it again the second time. 10, 17. Okay. 23, 20. So the number is getting higher. 19. The number is getting higher this time around. 37. Wow. Pelumi got 37. I would like to see what Mr. Oluwole got this time around. I'm sure he got everything. 38. Fantastic. Fantastic. All right. Now, what is this task trying to show us? Now, initially, when we did the first exercise, we had very few numbers. We had 9, we had 10, apart from Mr. Oluwole that got 24. But this time around, when we identified a pattern, we identified a sequence in which these numbers appear, it became easier for us to locate the numbers. And in a nutshell, that's how deriving insights from data analytics is all about. Data is all over the place. You have data all over the place, structured data, unstructured data, data from different sources. Your ability to derive, to identify patterns and trends in your data is what determines how valuable the insights you can get from the data. And we saw that when you tried the first exercise, it was all over the place. You couldn't really identify which number was where, and you were looking all over the place. But the moment you saw a pattern and you identified that number one is at the top left, then two follows sequentially in a clockwise manner, it was easier for us to find the numbers. And that's going to be the center of our discussion today. Being able to identify, getting data, identifying trends and patterns in your data, and using that, leveraging on that to derive insights for business growth, irrespective of the business, irrespective of the sector. Like the prof said, Professor Ekwekwe mentioned, the world is all about numbers. Your ability to understand the numbers determines the value you can create or get from the numbers. So let's go into what we have for today. So like I mentioned, I'm going to be showing you, we're going to understand, start from the basics, understand what data is, what big data is all about, big data analytics, and then how leading organizations all over the world. So organizations outside the agri sector, how are they leveraging on big data to drive their businesses, to drive business growth, and so on. And then we'll look at how the agri sector can also leverage on big data to drive, to solve problems, to reduce frictions in the agri sector, and to also create business growth as well. And of course, we'll take questions and answers at the end of the workshop. Now, what is data? As simple as the term is data, a lot of people, I'm sure if I asked this question before I showed you this slide, you'd come up with different, definitions and different suggestions, but data are simply facts that are related to any object in consideration. If I'm going to pick the table I'm currently seated on, it's a brown table. The brown color of the table is data related to that table. The object in consideration in this instance is the table. I can say that the table is about 20 centimeters wide. That is another data. It's another fact about the table. I can say the table is about 25 centimeters high. That is another data about the table. So data are simply facts related to any object. The object could be your crops. The object could be your soil. The object could be the atmosphere, could be the climate, and so on and so forth. For example, you take your name, your age, your height, your weight are all data that are related to you. Okay, so these are data that are related to you, your name, your age, your height, and your weight. So data are simply facts related to a particular object in consideration at a point in time. Now, data related to crops, examples, you have the rainfall, amount of rainfall, the water cycles, and etc. So we're going to look at more of that as we go ahead. But it's important that we even start to understand the simplest definitions or the simplest items when you're looking at leveraging on big data analytics. What is even data in the first instance? We need to be able to get to that level of understanding. Now, we understand what is data. So what is big data? When you say big data, what is big data? Big data means data that is big, right? And absolutely, just like the word implies, big data refers to data that is what? Large. Data that is huge and complex, fast, and are not very easy to analyze or to make sense out of using your traditional methods, right? So big data are data that are huge amounts of data that are churned out very often as fast as possible, data that also comes from different sources, various sources. And we're going to look at the characteristics of big data. So if data are facts related to objects, then big data are several facts related to several objects, right? Now we're going to look at the characteristics of big data, and we've put them into 5 V's. The 5 V's of big data. The first one is the volume. Big data comes in what? Large volume. And it's in large volume because they are coming from different sources. So you have different sources, data being generated from your mobile phone, your devices. You carry out a transaction in the bank. You have data from your credit card or from your debit card. You have data coming from RFID tags from the supermarket. You have data from social media, and so on and so forth. The volume is humongous. Secondly, the second V is the velocity, which is the speed at which the data is being generated. And it will interest you to know that 90% of the data generated from the past was generated from the last 5 years. 90% of the entire data we are sitting on today was generated within the last 5 years. So this shows you the speed in which data is being generated, on a regular basis. And the third V is the variety. The data comes from various sources, different sources, right? And different formats. So you have the data comes in a structured format. It can be semi-structured or unstructured formats. And it can also come in different forms, text-related data, audio data, video data, different types of data. So these are characteristics of big data. And the fourth V is the variability. So data, including the velocity and the different types of data, you also have data that are inconsistent. Big data generally is inconsistent. So it's important to know this because your ability to identify anomalies within these data enables you make meaningful analytics out of it, because you're able to detect what is an anomaly, what is out of place, and so on. So big data also has the characteristics of variability because you have the data is inconsistent most of the time. And the last is the veracity, which is the quality of the data. Because you have data coming from different sources, it's also important for you to easily identify or quickly identify the quality of the data that you are also getting into your systems for analysis. Generally, these are the 5 V's of big data, and they also represent the characteristics of big data. Okay, so just to move ahead, to show that when I say data rules the world, like I mentioned earlier, 90% of all the data was generated in the last 5 years. And the big data analytics market is also expected to reach about 103 billion by 2023. And 2020, every person generated at least 1.7 megabytes per second. So that shows you the huge amount of data generated on a regular basis. Internet users generate about 2.5 quintillion bytes of data each day. And 95% of businesses cite the need to manage unstructured data as one of their fundamental business problems. And also, using big data, Netflix is able to save $1 billion per year on customer retention. We're going to speak more into this and look more into this in detail to see what this all talks about. Now, having this huge amount of data generated on a regular basis, it's useless when you cannot make sense out of it. When you don't have the capacity to get the data, to analyze the data, to create models, to churn out analytics, to drive business decisions, irrespective of whatever sector you are currently playing in. The inability to leverage on analytic techniques to derive insights from this data makes the data useless, okay? So we now start to understand the need or the importance for us to develop the capacity to leverage on data to drive business decisions. So just like Professor mentioned earlier in his presentation, and like Mr. Oluwole also indicated, working or being in a business, whether it's in agriculture, the oil and gas, without data is as good as being blind. It's as good as being blind and just working without knowing where to go, planting without knowing where to plant, drilling without knowing where to drill for oil, right? Now, all of these, you are only able to get this when you are able to leverage on data to derive insights that would guide you on where you're meant to plant, what part of your farm needs specific amount of pesticide, specific amount of fertilizer, what part of your farm needs to be watered more, and so on and so forth. Being able to generate this type of insights would definitely enable the agricultural sector grow and solve the impending problems of the food demand in the coming years. Okay, now that we've seen how data is being generated, we've also seen what big data is all about. Now, what is big data analytics? Okay, and just before we get into that, we are saying data will talk to you if you are willing to listen. And this is a quote by Jim Bergensen. Data would listen to you if you are willing to listen. And you also have quotes like, if you torture the data enough, the data would what? Confess. Now, these are quotes which simply speaks to the fact that your ability or your capacity to interrogate data, your capacity to create models, to analyze data, determines the value you get out of the data. And going by this, data analytics, it's simply realizing actionable insights that can be applied immediately to drive business decisions. Actionable insights that can be applied immediately to drive business decisions. So you are getting data from different sources, like we mentioned. You have sensors in your farm that is generating data. You have data you get from some databases containing weather reports and so on and so forth. Your ability to derive actionable insights from the data is what would enable you drive your business and drive business decisions. And that's what data analytics speaks to generally. Now, we're going to look at how businesses have leveraged on big data analytics. And I'll just give you a practical, simple example in the power sector. In the power sector in Nigeria, we're all aware, while the power sector has its multitudes of multiple challenges here and there, it will also interest you to know that being profitable or even being able to break even in the sector needs a very high level of efficiency. So if you are in the generating sector, so you are one of the gencos, you generate electricity, you generate power, you are one of the discos, you distribute. Your ability to be efficient determines how profitable you are, or to ensure that you are not incurring losses year in, year out. And a practical example is, when during the year do I need to take my generating plant out for maintenance? Okay, as simple as that sounds, it's also very critical and very important. Looking at the Nigerian power sector as an example. So you have plants that generate power. These are machines that need to be maintained regularly so that it keeps on generating power, right? So when do you take your machines out? Or when do you take your plants out for maintenance? It's extremely critical. And leveraging on data analytics, one of the things Sahara Power Group has been able to do is, across industry players within the sector, and using that to look at the two different types of generating plants you have in Nigeria. Typically, you have the hydros and you have uses gas. Now, when the hydros are not generating, or they're not generating optimally, it's because their dams are not flooded. The dams are only flooded when there is rainfall and towards the end of the rainy season. Most people get this wrong by saying that the hydros generate more power when the rains are here. But it's not when the rains are falling that the hydros generate more power. It's after the rainfall when the dams are flooded. Now, understanding this and applying some analytic techniques, regression analysis, and so on, you're able to create a plan. You're able to create a system where you know when to take your plants out for maintenance so that you're not losing money by shutting down your plants. So we're going to look at how other businesses have been able to leverage on big data analytics to drive their business, to improve business growth, and then we'll move on to the agri sector. And I'm going to take Netflix as an example. Most of us use Netflix. We stream our movies, our TV shows. We stream movies online on Netflix. Now, looking at Netflix growth for the past 5 years, the growth has been exponential. From 2016 up until 2020, Netflix has grown by over 100% in terms of subscribers worldwide. Now, why did this happen? This happened because Netflix are able to retain customers. If you're a customer on Netflix, there's a high tendency that you remain a customer over a long period of time. And if you compare Netflix to other competitors, you would also notice that Netflix has higher number of subscribers more than its competitors, even though Netflix is relatively new compared to most of its competitors. And the way Netflix does this is simply by leveraging on data analytics. And how does this happen? In as much as it sounds like it's complex, it's at the same time very easy. Now, by collecting data from different subscribers, the moment you start to register for Netflix, you have a registration form where you would indicate your name, you indicate your age, and certain data like that. You also indicate, in the next stage, you indicate the type of movies you would like to see, the type of TV shows you also like to see. And Netflix takes these data from its over 204 million subscribers, applies some analytic models to the data, and comes up with a recommender system. And what the recommender system does is simply to take the data, create user profiles for each subscriber. So each subscriber has a user profile. And then based on that profile, Netflix recommends TV shows and movies to each subscriber. So take Adeiza, for example. Adeiza Suleman is a Netflix subscriber. I watch a movie, an action, type of movie. I watch the first 20 minutes and I stop. I watch another action movie. I watch the next, maybe the first 25 minutes and I stop and I don't complete that movie. What happens is this: Netflix sees that Adeiza doesn't like this type of movies, or he doesn't like this type of movies that has this particular actor in it. And what happens is he doesn't recommend those type of movies to me any longer. Now, Netflix would also track the type of movies that I watch and also track movies that I watch from the beginning till the end, and TV shows that I also complete from the first episode to the last episode, and use that data to recommend more type of movie shows and more type of TV shows and more type of movies to me. And by doing this, they're able to save over $1 billion per year on customer retention. Now, we are beginning to see the importance of big data analytics. We're also going to look at targets. And this example is one of the examples that whenever it intrigues me, and it's also, it intrigues me, and it's also very interesting to see that a retail giant, a supermarket store in the US, predicts pregnancy in their predicts pregnancies in their customers even before anybody knows. So take this scenario. You have a young lady who is 20-something. She comes to the store. She purchases a large container of unscented lotion. She also buys supplements like zinc, calcium, and also buys a large bag that is big enough to contain some baby clothes and baby products and so on. Based on the type of products that this lady has bought, Target then uses that to predict that a lady is about 5 months pregnant from today. So not just predicting that the person is pregnant, but predicting the term of the pregnancy, so that the lady is 5 months pregnant, she's 3 months pregnant, she's 6 months pregnant, without even carrying any tests. This is done simply by what? Looking at the data from which the customer has bought. Okay, and how does this happen generally? So when you register as a Target customer, you have an ID that is assigned to you, right? That ID is then used as a bucket that will track the history of any product you buy. So any product you buy, that ID is what is used to track the product. So using the data from different data points, Target identified 25 products that when a customer buys that product, they have a model that predicts that the lady is a certain number of months pregnant. And what they do is they use that information to target advertisement to the particular customer. So if you're 5 months pregnant, we want you to start to purchase certain baby items. So they start to target you with those kind of adverts. Okay, now this is the way Target does it. Now, even let's go to football. Looking at football, football has changed from what we used to know in the past. Football is no longer, you have the biggest names up there, and those are the teams that keep on winning football matches and so on and so forth. Football matches are now highly data driven. Football teams develop algorithms, machine learning models to predict the way a team is going to perform based on how they have performed in the past. And this is the way Hearts was able to end Celtic's 69-game unbeaten run in the year 2017. And how did they do that? The analytics team in the coaching crew were able to get data from Celtic's previous matches and realize that whenever a team uses possession of 4-3-3, a 4-3-3 possession, which means 4 defenders, 3 midfielders, and 3 attackers, and each team member is able to cover an average of 11.8 kilometers per man, per player, Celtic always had problems with those kind of teams. So what happened? Hearts were able to develop a strategy, and they just simply said, this is what has worked in the past. This is what the data is saying. What we're going to simply do is we'll use team members, even though they're not first team members, we'll use team members that can run an average of 11.8 kilometers per game. We're going to use a formation of 4-3-3, and we're going to hustle Celtic out of possession. And guess what? Hearts were able to win the match 4-0, and they ended Celtic's dominance of 69 games unbeaten. Now, looking at what players in the industry has done, or what players in the industries are doing, in different industries are doing by leveraging on data, I begin to ask myself, is it even possible to succeed in business without leveraging on data? For me, I think it's impossible, because how then do you determine what your customer wants? How then do you determine the type of crop you need to plant at a particular period? How then do you determine the soil nutrients across your entire farm? Do you have equal amount of nutrients across the farm? Does a particular part of the farm need more fertilizer, than the other parts of the farm, and so on and so forth? Okay, so how can stakeholders in the agriculture sector start to look at data analytics and use data analytics to and leverage on data analytics to improve growth? Now, you look at different data points when you're looking at agriculture. You want to look at the crop water balance. What's the water balance? What's the wind like? The humidity, the air temperature. You also want to look at the soil temperature, the soil pH level, and so on and so forth. What's the acidic level of the soil and all of that. You want to look at the rainfall, what's the weather pattern, and all of that. Looking at what has been happening recently, you would agree with me that global warming is also changing the way that the climate is changing the climate as we know it. You don't really have your typical rainy season and your dry season and harmattan. I mean, it snowed in Texas this year, which is something that, it doesn't happen, right? So the world is changing. And how do we now start to look at the data, gather the data, and use that to predict what is likely going to happen? If I'm going to put a crop into the ground when I believe it should be rainy season, are we actually going to have rainy season? So being able to look at these data points and using that to predict what is likely going to happen enables us improve crop yield, improve our production, and the sustainability of the agricultural sector eventually. And one point I also want to mention is now you have, let's assume we have the ability to gather data from all these different sources and take note of all these data points. Your model or your algorithm is just as important as your ability to gather the data. Being able to bring the data together and apply different techniques, including machine learning models, different techniques to derive insights from the data. Your ability to do that is just as important as gathering the data in the first place. Okay. The professor mentioned that, we are getting to a level where we'd find ourselves in a very tight situation, looking at our population growth and looking at our production level in terms of agriculture. Okay. So what this chart simply shows us is, in the year 2100, Nigeria would have the second highest population, or the second largest population in the world, surpassing China, surpassing the US, right? Well, even as we can see on this chart that India is number one, you would notice that India in 2017 and India in the 2100 has a lower population growth. So the population growth has reduced, even though it's number one. But Nigeria is going to grow at a rate where we'll have an average of 791 million people to feed. Are we self-sustainable? Can we sustain that? And at what level do we need to grow? So we're not going to create more land, arable lands for farming, and more lands are not just going to appear from the thin air. The way to go about it would simply be leveraging on data, our ability to leverage on data to ensure that we reduce waste. We're able to reduce costs by ensuring that we put in different elements, different produce where they should be. We don't put pesticides across just like you would generally. So data-driven farming is what we need to focus on. And what do we mean by data-driven farming? Data-driven farming is simply our ability to map every farm, and overlay it with data, with lots and lots of data. For example, I want to know my soil moisture level 6 feet below the ground throughout the entire farm. I want to know the soil nutrient level throughout my entire farm. Your ability to build maps to show you this data would enable you apply techniques in precision agriculture. And what's precision agriculture? Precision agriculture is simply your ability to apply certain type of techniques at specific spots in your farm. Now, what you would see is farmers applying pesticides uniformly throughout the entire farm. Farmers applying water uniformly throughout the entire farm. Now, precision agriculture, you don't need to do this because you are able to identify where needs more water and where needs more pesticide. And by doing this, you're even protecting the environment, because you're not putting in too much pesticides into the soil, you're not putting too much pesticides into the crops, and so on and so forth. And you're also able to save a lot of water. Okay, now, in order to reduce, or in order to alleviate the impending food demand by the surge in population, FAO has projected that we need to produce arable crops by as much as 70%. We need to increase our production by as much as 70%, which the Professor Ekwekwe also mentioned. And this is by using the same land resources. By using the same land resources, we need to do this. So this has put a lot of pressure into the agricultural sector. Now, in order to do this precision agriculture, data-driven agriculture, we need to gather data. Now, the data gathering is extremely important, and gathering the data the data can come from different sources. And this is key to, practicing precision agriculture and data-driven agriculture. So you have sensors in the ground that you use for your soil and plant analysis. You have drones for aerial mapping and imaging, and you have satellite imaging as well. And these are very important data gathering tools that we can employ in our farms to ensure that we're able to gather the right type of data and to use that to implement precision agriculture for increased yield production and so on. Now, when you gather this data from all these different sources, from the sensors in the ground, the drone in the drones flying over the farms, and the satellite imaging, you're able to see the soil contamination. What's the soil contamination level? You can identify the soil condition, what's the crop nutrient uptake, the crop yield forecast. You're able to forecast the yields, what the crop yields would look like, and so on. And also identify when is the best time to harvest my products. Do I harvest by the conventional, okay, I need to wait 6 months for this particular crop to mature before harvesting? Is it actually, time for me to harvest, and all of that? And also monitor gas emissions. Do I need to, put more nitrogen into the soil and things like that? Now we're able to gather these sources, and the process in which the data gathering to deriving the insights is simply gathering the data, pre-processing the data, because you want to ensure that you're able to remove anomalies from the data. You want to be sure that the data is in the right format to which it can, be analyzed and used to create models to derive insights from them. So after pre-processing the data, you then develop algorithms and models, for example, crop yield prediction, to predict crop yields, to also predict crop harvesting time, and so on. Now, after doing that, you then visualize the data. So you've gotten the data, you've pre-processed the data, you develop your models and algorithms, and then you visualize what you've seen. And from there, from your data visualization, you are able to identify patterns, you are able to identify trends, and then you can derive insights from that to apply to your farm practices. So just like we can see at the right, we can see the optimum harvesting time, showing the plant size and the period, the time the plant has been in the ground. Okay, now also looking at precision agriculture, you have, because most of these tools, most of the tools you put into the ground, the sensors you use to gather the data, some of them are very expensive, right? Some of the tools are very expensive, and you cannot easily, for a farmer who has a small farm and a farmer who, is just trying to, has a few acres of land and is trying to produce, to be self-sufficient, and as well to also sell some of them in commercial quantity, it'll be a bit difficult to acquire some of these tools. Now, how can that be possible? Certain technologies exists, like the aerial tethered camera, for example. This is a tool developed by Microsoft. And how does it work? So you have a balloon. You have a balloon that flies across your farm and take pictures of the farm. Those pictures are then sent to the mobile phone. So you have the pictures in the mobile phone, and the mobile phone, the pictures are then aggregated together and used to develop maps, a panoramic view of the entire farm. So you have a panoramic view of the entire farm, and that gives you insights into certain areas of your farm and what is happening across the farm. Now, we're also looking and also thinking, could this also help solve some of the crises we currently have in the sector? Looking at the header farmer crisis, for example, where you have stray cattle moving into certain, farmlands and eating up the crops and so on and so forth. Having the ability to have, a 360 view of your farm, knowing what is going on, gives you insights on what to do and things you need to look at certain point in time. And looking at this panoramic view of this farmland, so you can see the farmland at the top, and you can see certain area identified based on the imaging that has been captured by the aerial camera. So a particular point in the farm, you have water puddle. This shows that you need to cover this place up. You have cow excreta that also shows you that, well, maybe your cows are doing just fine because the excreta and so on look, the way they should be. Then you have the head of cow in a particular place. You have the cattle in a particular area. And then you have a stray cow. And this tells you that, oh, you need to bring this stray cow just back into the herd because, the stray cow can lead other cows to follow it, and get into certain locations where they shouldn't get into. Now, these are areas where, agriculture can start to look at, big data to drive growth and to also ensure that, Nigeria and Africa as a continent is able to be food sufficient and provide adequate produce based on demand, given the rise in population. So other use cases for big data in farms, we're just going to look at a few cases. We've talked about the growth in population and the need to ensure that you get the maximum yield from your existing farmlands by looking at your rainfall patterns, by looking at your water cycles, the fertilizer requirements, and making smart decisions to ensure that you harvest, optimally. Secondly, using pesticides ethically. Like I showed earlier, you don't need to, there might not be need for you to apply equal quantity or uniform quantity of pesticide across the entire farm, depending on the type of crop you're planting, depending on the type of soil and all of that. Now, I'm sure some of you, well, I've seen this happen severally. You go to the market, you buy tomatoes. Well, even after washing the tomatoes severally, you'd realize that you still have some oily filling on the tomatoes. And this is because a lot of pesticides have been added to the tomatoes. And you start to ask, is this even safe for eating? Now, to ensure that we're able, farmers know the right quantity and also know when and how much they need to apply pesticides. It's also very important to ensuring, yields and also reducing losses, reducing costs for the farmers eventually. Now, optimizing farm equipment for larger farms or for farmers who practice, large, scale agriculture, where you have several tractors, putting in some certain types of sensors into your farm machinery, you are able to track availability of certain types of farm equipment, your tractors, when last the tractor was serviced, when it would need more servicing, and so on and so forth. So sensors are used to optimize farm equipment and to ensure that you don't have a situation where a farm equipment has broken down, and you cannot, manage your farm as you ordinarily would. And of course, supply chain issues. Now, there's a gap that exists between the farmers and the consumers. That's where the crops are produced and how it gets to the consumers. And the McKinsey reports indicates that at least one third of food produced for consumption is lost or wasted every year. Okay, is lost or wasted every year. So also leveraging on data analytics can cover this gap for us. How? By giving us visibility, enough visibility to the supply chain, to the entire supply chain, right? So you are able to track and optimize farm, practices. You're able to track the trucks and when they'll be available. You're able to track a particular farm. The farmer knows when he would have his produce available. The farmer knows when he's going to harvest. The supply chain, the players in the supply chain at the other end of the supply chain also knows when, a particular farm would be, harvesting, and they're able to provide adequate, equipment and adequate instruments to ensure that the produce don't stay too long in the farms. The produce should be transported or should be taken right from where it's being harvested to where it would be consumed, in an efficient manner. So looking at these 4 use cases, you can see that there is a whole lot we need to do when it comes to leveraging on big data in the agri spaces. So you have so many, some organizations that are already trying to solve these problems. Okay, so you have an agri-tech startup, the Rural Farmers Hub, that are trying to solve some of these problems by doing what? Creating applications or creating solutions that provide farmers with advisory services. Like Professor Ekwekwe also, hinted, also mentioned, Zenvos is already, doing a lot of things within this space as well, creating solutions, sensors that gathers data from the soil up onto the plant identified, knowing what the plant condition is like, what the soil condition is like, what needs to be added where, and also using imaging, coupling that with the soil information, with the plant information, gives a holistic view on what is going on in the farm, and then we are able to apply the right type of management, farm management techniques where it needs to be. Now you have the capture and the village chief, which are 2 solutions provided by the Farmers Hub, where it's a system that delivers advisory services to the farmers. They just simply install it on their mobile phones, and by also getting data from the soil, getting data, around the farm, information gets to the farmer on when to harvest, the areas of the farm land that needs, attention, perhaps due to pest invasion or diseases, from 1 or 2 livestock in the farm, and so on and so forth. And satellite imaging is extensively used to ensure that these solutions, achieve what they are meant to achieve. Now I'm going to share a video. I'll show a video quickly before we end the session. So I'm fast coming to the end of the session. Now, while precision agriculture has existed since the 80s, it has not really taken off. And the major reason why precision agriculture has not taken off is simply because of the cost. Now, for a farmer, looking at a typical Nigerian setting where you have a farmer who is not even educated, you have a farmer that, had land willed down to him from his ancestors, from his fathers, his grandfathers, and so on, and decides to farm and also, make this available for commercial sale. I happen to serve in Kwara State, in a very remote area in Kwara State, in Kayama local government, to be precise. And what you have there, you have farmers that mainly produce yam. And they have market days where you get to the market and all you see is just yams. And I started to see people coming from across different states within Nigeria, from Kogi State, from Lagos State. They come all the way down to Kwara State to, purchase these yams. And I start to wonder that, what if these farmers are able to apply, some of all these techniques? Because one of the challenges they face is rainfall. So they don't have rainfall, and they go into fasting and prayer. They go into all sorts of, traditional methods to ensure that, they have rainfall for their crop to improve crop yield and all of that. But what if they have the right type of data to know what exactly they need to do and apply them appropriately? I'm sure that Nigeria eventually will become, self-sufficient when you talk about food production. So now, looking at the cost of what it takes to acquire some of these sensors, acquire the drones, to cover the farm, to do the aerial mapping and all of that, you have some organizations, trying to also solve that problem by coming up with cheap solutions to addressing that. And I'll quickly play a video of about 2 minutes that shows how Microsoft is trying to address this problem. And I think Prof also showed us how Zenvos is also trying to address this. Okay, so I'll quickly I'll show the video, and so let's see. Okay. Okay, so please, you can also...
My name is Sean Stratman, and I'm a farmer.
Please send in the chat so that I know that you can hear the volume is loud and clear, and you can also see the video. So please let me know in the group chat. All right, so I'm just going to play the video again.
Yeah, we can see. We can see and hear the video.
All right, fantastic. All right, so let's quickly watch this, and then we come to the end of the session.
My name is Sean Stratman, and I'm a farmer. I've been doing this a long time, and it's clear now more than ever that we need to find better ways of growing to ensure a sustainable future for farming. Water scarcity and agricultural pollution are all creating pressures that farmers around the world are feeling. We are looking to human ingenuity and technology to feed our growing population.
My background is in connectivity and battery technologies, but I grew up spending summers on our family farm in India. That foundation gives me a unique perspective in my work as a principal researcher at Microsoft. New sensor technology is a great tool in providing data on soil moisture and soil nutrients to help farmers make best use of their resources. Unfortunately, these sensor solutions can cost thousands of dollars per sensor and require many sensors to monitor a field properly. Drones and other imaging technologies can provide very useful data and allow for precise monitoring of land over time. But these devices require a high bandwidth wireless connection from the middle of the farm. To solve our connectivity problem, we utilize the unused channels for TV broadcasts, which are abundant in rural areas. This allows us to transfer large amounts of data from cameras and sensors in these remote areas to a local processor at the farm and out to the Microsoft cloud.
So I send this up, and it's taking pictures all the time.
Our big breakthrough was the integration of machine learning into the processing of imaging and ground sensor data. Through this process, the data insights are magnified. From 2 finite data points, we are able to create a detailed heat map of the farm. The farmer is able to access this map and utilize it to inform resource management and to track the effects of the inputs.
Having a greater understanding of soil conditions and how our actions affect them, it allows us to put the work in where it's needed. It's changing the way that we work with the land, and it's changing the way the land works for us.
Okay. All right. So back to the session. I hope you enjoyed the video. So just like I mentioned earlier, the video just shows us how solutions are being developed to ensure that the farming practices are a lot smarter and farming practices are a lot more precise. And we do things with level of precision that helps us optimize our yield, helps us reduce costs, and also ensures that eventually production is sufficient enough to meet the growing demands. Now, how do you need to get started? For me, I think it's very important for those playing within this space to develop capacity in data analytics, to understand what data analytics is all about, and how to implement data analytics into farming practices. As simple as getting the weather data and also relating that to the crop yield can give a lot of insights into what is happening in our farms. But like I mentioned earlier, your ability to gather data is just as important as the type of analytic models you deploy that helps you generate insights from the data. Okay, and then again, collecting data is extremely, extremely important. And we've seen that sometimes it could be very expensive, especially for the small farmer. So one of the things that I think, would kick off this revolution in the agricultural sector is by coming up with solutions to help gather this data and make it easily accessible to players within the industry, which players are already coming up with solutions in this space. Now, in a few years, when we talk about hunger, we talk about food shortage and so on, the conversation is not going to be about insufficient farmlands. The conversation is not going to be about, inadequate farmers and so on. The conversation is going to be about our capacity as a people to practice smart agriculture and precision farming. And for me, in my opinion, I think this is the only way we can ensure that in a few years down the line, we are able to remain self-sufficient in terms of food production in Nigeria as a country and in Africa as a whole. So I'd like to thank you for your time, and I would come to the end of my presentation at this point. Thank you very much for your rapt attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Suleman Adeiza, for that wonderful session. In your opening slide, where you said you have a passion for teaching, I can see that put into practice because I really follow through and I enjoy those sessions. So thank you very, very much, Mr. Suleiman. One of the participants is already asking, can they have access to the slides presented? I know we may have to discuss that with Mr. Ismail so that we can make it available to them. You have said so many things. You've created a background for why we need to have a data-driven farming practice. You call it smart farming, precision agriculture, and I love that word. You see, in Africa, in Nigeria, farmers need much more information. What your presentation and that of Prof has actually shown us is that there is need for us to go data-driven in our practices so as to ensure adequate food security and, of course, to increase productivity in the farming and agriculture sector in Nigeria and in Africa as a whole. We want to thank you very, very, very much. Now, you see, we are going to start the question and answer session, the discussion session. And as I've said, the participants have been instructed to drop their questions in the comment section. So if you have one or two questions, you have a comment, you have an observation, please drop it so that Mr. Suleman can attend to that. What came to my mind, especially on the farmers that are small scale farmers. So how do you think, what are your recommendations for making this become cheaper and more accessible to the smallholder farmers that we have on the continent? So while you attend to that question, I'll be waiting to get questions from the participants. Ask your questions, your comments, your observations. You can either drop them in the comment section or you raise your hand and I will call you to ask your questions. So what are your suggestions, Mr. Suleman, as to making precision farming, data collection, tools and practices more accessible to the people in the rural areas?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. So for me, what I think needs to be done is the ability to have a central repository of data. So let me call it a central database, so to speak. And what do I mean by this? So let's take, for example, we look at some farms in a particular location, in similar locations. Yeah, so while it would be very expensive to deploy all those sensors, so many sensors. So let's assume that in order to have adequate data in a single farm, in a 10-hectare farm, for example, you need 10 sensors to do that. And one sensor costs about $1,000. So what if we have a system, or we have a solution where rather than having 10 sensors in a single farm, you have maybe 3 sensors in a farm. You have 3 sensors in another farm. You have 3 sensors in a third farm, right? Because they're in the same or in a similar geographic location. One of the fantastic things about data analytics is the ability to extrapolate, or the ability to predict. So rather than focusing all resources on a single farm, it's possible to have a group, or a group of farms or group of farmers, investing those sensors, investing those data collecting tools across all these farms, and then having a central repository. Now, where the main work would be developing the right models to predict, to get some data from all these farms, and also get data that can be added to that. Maybe data from the weather, data from the satellite imaging, and so on. So what happens here is we're not just focusing on one farm, we are focusing on a multitude of farms. And deploying the right type of analytics, we're able to predict that if this is happening in farm A and this is happening in farm B, this is likely going to happen in farm C. So we don't need as many sensors as we would in a single farm, and then we can, deploy those extra sensors in more farms and leveraging on data analytic techniques to build models that can predict based on the data we would have available. So by doing this, a farmer would not be required to spend so much to get that information, because the investment would have not been as much as it would, so I'll call it a distributed sensor, deployment, across several farms. For me, this is a technique, or this is a way I think we can reduce, or we can bring down the costs, and of course, whoever the investor is can then take this data, validate the data, build the models, validate the data, test it, ensure that the data delivers the right results, and then provide solutions to those group of customers. So instead of providing the solution to a single customer, you are then providing it to a group of customers. And by doing this, evidently would reduce the cost of the farmers acquiring this type of solutions.
Very much for that answer. I will call on Mr. Adeiza Suleman, the founder of Farm Connect, because I'm sure that there will be one or two things that it would have derived from your presentation. But before doing that, I also want to ask, as we are talking about crowd using data collection tools on farms, where they are sharing. After all, we are in the shared economy now. I was also thinking about collaboration between government agencies, tertiary institutions, and some of these private investors. Okay, for instance, an agency such as the Meteorological Agency usually collects the weather data already. So how can they? So I want us to look at the place of collaboration in ensuring that precision farming gets more pronounced in the agricultural sector in Nigeria, so that we can smartly raise our productivity level. So what is your take on collaboration?
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mr. Adebi. I think collaboration is extremely profound and very important. It's pertinent for for all these things to happen eventually. Like you mentioned, it's a shared economy. Being able to also leverage on others data that we can get from government agencies, data we can get from certain institutions, the universities, and some research organizations and so on, coming together to solving this problem is extremely important and extremely critical. And of course, this would also play in reducing the cost eventually, because one person setting out to solving all the problems would definitely would not be economically smart, if I could use that word. Having the weather data, for example, coming from the meteorological organization, you have experts, you have professors in crop science, professors in soil and all of that. You have professors in agriculture, and even students as well, who would serve as experts into looking at your job as a data analyst or somebody who is building a model. Is you have the techniques, the you know how to write the programs, you know how to write the codes. But of course, you'd also need expert advice on what, based on the data, or you've gotten data from sensors, you've seen that, okay, you have this certain level of acidity in the soil, and you've seen a correlation between the acidity and the weather pattern, right? You've seen a correlation, you've been able to identify a pattern. Now, you would also need the input of experts in the field to also say that, oh, when things like this happen, this is what it likely means. So you all need all the stakeholders to come together and collaborate to solve most of these problems that currently exist. Collaboration is key, and it's fundamental to ensuring that precision agriculture or smart agriculture, data-driven agriculture, call it whatever you want to call it, for it to happen, collaboration has to be a key driver to that happening. So that's my take, and that's what I think needs to be done.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. As we are speaking, I was also thinking about going back to our tertiary institutions. Nigeria has a number of institutions that are dedicated to agric, Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta, and wherever you have them. I think there is a need for some of these new development and trends to come into the curriculum of our tertiary institutions, and of course impacts on their research, so that more ways to ensure that access to some of this equipment become cheap. Maybe we can have indigenously developed technologies in those areas that will not be as expensive as those ones being brought from the outside, and what have you. So I know that FIDAS too should be thinking in this direction. It's a gap that we have taken a very good note of. So I don't know, before we close the session, I want to call on Mr. Aziz Oluwole to for his remarks, if any.
Okay, sorry, just to quickly add to that before Mr. Oluwole comes on board. I think what you've mentioned is also very, very important. And yes, thank God we have, an organization like Farm Connect that can help push the narrative, that can also help push, this, to the respective government agency that should be responsible. I believe the Ministry of Education, to be precise, because what you have, most of the times is you have intellectuals in the universities, especially universities dedicated to agriculture, but the curriculum and what is being passed on to the new generation of graduates does not address the current challenges we face. And the reason why I said this is very important is because you get to sit down with some people. I had a meeting sometime, I think in 2019, with a gentleman who wanted to launch a university in Nigeria. And what the university was set out to achieve is applying practical aspects of the job, not applying a high level of practicality to solving problems, and rather than the theoretical aspects that we are used to in the educational sector. But it did not fly. Eventually it was not approved that you cannot operate this kind of curriculum in Nigeria, and he eventually went all the way to the Gambia to set up the university. So I think having the right people, having an organization like Farm Connect to push this type of objectives, to push the narrative, I believe a lot can be done in that aspect. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
I totally agree. I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think it is that time we began to clamor for specialized training institutions, maybe at the university level, where focus will be on using latest trends to train the students. After all, some of the students we are having are digital natives, and they need smart and digital tools to solve some of the problems that their grandfathers and fathers have encountered. And I think they have the power, the inclination to actually do that. Nigeria only needs to step up its games as far as the education is concerned, and also let that also go into the research that they conducted in a lot of these schools. So I want to thank you very much, Mr. Adeiza Suleman, for this wonderful session this afternoon. I can see that a lot of the comments we have here have been thank you for the training. People have actually appreciated you. You've broken down the concept in such a manner that we all have a clear understanding of what it means to employ smart agric using data driven methods and practices. So I want to thank you. At this point, I will call on the web planner, the webinar chief planner, Mr. Ismail Tiamiyu, to come in and give us the closing remarks / vote of thanks. Before I bring him in, please let me pass this information. The workshop comes with a certificate, and people that have attended are expected to drop their email and how they want their names to be appropriately written in the comment section, so that they can have the certificate after the program. Thank you. Ismail, please come on board.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, especially Mr. Adeiza, for that insightful lecture that you've given us. Actually, I was going to ask a question because you've been able to explore the role of big data in the agricultural industry and how stakeholders in the agricultural industry could actually leverage on data, to upscale, farming in the industry. But something just came up to my mind because, in as much as we are working in the agricultural industry, to improve the level of operation in the industry, we also need to influence policy. And one strategic way of influencing policy is to tell stories, to bring narratives on board, to win emotions of people. And I think big data or data analysis is also a way that we can actually tell stories. I want to know, how do we, leverage on data to tell stories, to bring out narratives in the agricultural industry? Just briefly, I would like you to explain that.
Okay. Thank you for the question, Mr. Ismail. So, of course, part of data analytics involves storytelling, data storytelling. And data storytelling is important when you want to use it for, um, you want to use it to influence policies and for those kind of objectives. Now, when you want to tell a story with data, especially to influence a policy, so you want to show either a good, you want to show either two things, one of two things. Either you want to show, you want to tell a good story, or you want to tell a bad story. So once you've identified what you want to tell, the good story or the bad story, now you now have to determine if it's a good story. For example, you have done something in your farm, um, you implemented a particular, strategy in your farm based on what you had seen in from the data. So, for example, we talked about sensors. So you got a sensor, you put it in your farm, you got data from the sensor, you analyzed the data, or if it's a solution that already gives you some that already gives you, if it's a system that already gives you a solution on what to do, you employ those strategies and you saw that it worked, right? And you want government to implement a policy to say that, okay, we're going to invest, or we're going to put in some amount of money, we're going to budget some amount of money to building on to build smart technology for smart agriculture. Then you can use that as a story and start your story. Always start your story with something that, will throw everybody off balance. So for example, you can say that, from growing 1 ton of cassava in a year to growing 20 tons, something that would get everybody's attention. So that's the good story, showing that I did this in my farm and I was able to get this value. And based on the value I have gotten, I now want you to invest, or I want you to put in some level of support to achieving more, because if I do more, this is what I'm going to achieve, right? Now, being able to do this in the first instance, you have to work with data, because you have to know where you're coming from, what your farm currently produces, the quantity you currently produce, and so on. Then after you did this is what it led to. You measure, along the line. And at the end of the day, you are able to predict. If I'd done this in the past, over maybe the past 5 years, and I introduce something new, and this is what I got, it means if I keep on doing this, I'm likely going to get this. So you're able to tell a story in that line. And you can also tell a bad story, right? By saying that, maybe just taking historical data, for example, and looking at Nigeria as a whole, and saying that if we keep up with the same trend, in the next 10 years, we're not going to have any food. No Nigerian is going to have any food on his or her table. Now you're painting a bad story, you're painting a gloom picture, and you can use that as a basis to, influence policy by saying that if we don't do this, this is where we're likely going to be, at the turn of the century, or in the next 10, 15 years or thereabout. Data storytelling is a skill on its own. It's a science as well as it's an art. It's a science because you're going to work with data. You're going to have to analyze data, looking at history, looking at what is currently happening, and then you're also going to predict what is likely going to happen. It's also an art because you're going to have to use certain type of presentation skills. You use certain type of presentation skills. You would also have to know the right type of pictures, know the right type of charts to use that would communicate your story effectively. Okay, and that's what makes data storytelling, impactful at the end of the day. So I hope that answers your question, Ismail.
Yes, thank you very much for that beautiful response to that question on storytelling and data analytics. So we want to thank you very much for you're coming to facilitate this workshop. The webinar is a quarterly webinar, and this one is for the first quarter of 2021. Very soon, we are going to announce when the one for the second quarter is going to take place. And I hope everyone who has come here today will also join us and more. We need more people. We need people from the academia. We need people from other organizations that have a lot to do with this area we are talking about. So when Mr. Oluwole was speaking at the OP of the program, he said FIDAS is ready to collaborate and partner with agencies, with organizations that are ready to do this. So I can see a lot of collaboration that could take place here and give us more opportunities in precision farming and agriculture. So on behalf of the Farm Connect Institute for Data and Agriculture Agri-Tech Business, Agri-Tech Institute, FIDAS, I want to thank everyone. I want to thank Mr. Adeiza Suleman for that wonderful presentation. Somebody is asking here that how can they have your contact so that they could continue the conversation? Mr. Olajide Ogbe is asking, how can I contact the speaker for further discussion on this? So at this point, we are going to call the webinar for this quarter. We call it a day on this webinar, and we look forward to meeting all of you next time, sometimes in the second quarter of 2021, when we are going to be having this again. So on behalf of the management of FIDAS, I want to thank you very much for being here. Thank you as we all go. May God keep us till the next time. Bye from my hand. Rashid Adimola DB is my name. Until then, bye-bye.
Thank you very much, sir. It was truly a pleasure.
Yeah, Mr. Suleiman, for the person that needs your contacts, do you want to give out your contact for people that want to reach out to you?
Okay, so you can easily follow me on LinkedIn. Just search for my name, Adeiza Suleman. You can also, I'm just going to drop my email address as well. You can, adeizasuleman@gmail.com. Okay, the Suleman is without an I. Okay, I'm just going to type that in the group chat, adeizasuleman@gmail.com. And then you can just search for me on LinkedIn, Adeiza Suleman. And then you can connect, and then I'll follow you. As soon as I see the connection, I'll follow you immediately. You can also reach me by email on adeizasuleman@gmail.com.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.